Welcome to another episode of Art and Soul. This episode features Warren Adams, Charles Randolph Wright, Zhailon Levingston, and is hosted by Matthew Johnson Harris. It is titled Changing Directions, 4 different Black directors from 4 different generations. Help us build our community by subscribing to this YouTube channel, sharing and liking this episode, and following the Art and Soul podcast on Instagram and TikTok. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Art and Soul, where we explore the intersection between making art and spirituality. I'm Matthew Johnson Harris, and as y'all know by now, I start every single episode with a centering mantra or affirmation. And the mantra and affirmation for this episode is, I can always change direction. I can always change direction. No matter where you are, what you might be going through, what you might be going against, you right now in this moment can change direction. So I want you to take a deep breath in through your nose, out through your mouth, and just sit with that. I can always change direction. If that's the mantra for the episode, it's only fitting that I would bring in my friends, my mentors, my brothers, who also just happen to be 3 Black men who have directed and choreographed on Broadway, TV, film, all over the place, but most importantly are so centered in their humanity so they can share the humanities of others. Please welcome Warren, Charles, and Zhailon. Huh? Hey, y'all.
Hey there. We're here.
OMG. So as I was building Art and Soul, I was thinking of what episode would I want to watch coming up, and it would be 4 Black men from 4 different generations talking about their individual lived experiences being directors and leaders in this field. And I've had a moment with each one of you at a different time where you've had a conversation with me and have guided me and shared some tea with me and been really real with me. I'm like, you know, is this producer like this? Or did you have this relationship with that person? And you're like, yeah. And you've been that for me in a way that has made it so much easier. I don't want to say it's made it that much better because this business is just hard, but it's easier to have you all in my life. And I just want to thank you for that. And that's why you're here.
You're welcome, of course.
And I appreciate you all. So I like to always start with this question because I think it opens up the door to a lot of different things. Is there any part of your practice that just feels naturally spiritual? And anybody can jump in.
I'll jump in.
Go.
Please.
Everything I do is. I can't imagine not having that grounding because what we do is so insane. And if you don't have a grounding, if you don't have a base to function, you can't tell the truth. And Warren and I worked on Motown, and I immediately thought of something when you were beginning. I was in a workshop. We were workshopping, and we were at his house in Los Angeles. And one day, he and I were walking down on this compound where he lives.
Mr. Gordy, right?
Yeah, Mr. Gordy.
Oh yeah,
we're walking
casual.
down this.
We're walking down.
Yeah, when he says
Very Gordy.
he's saying very Gordy.
Very Gordy. Very Gordy.
Not your compound?
So that's your compound. Yours. It's coming. But we were walking down, and and I was complaining about something and just trying to make something happen. He said, "Direction is more important than speed." Ooh. And it enabled me to continue. That our direction, the direction of what we were doing, my job as a director, but how we all worked in a certain direction. How do you pull everybody together to have that same direction as you're directing? And when you said that in the beginning, I thought, I have to tell you that. So that direction, I have to have the grounding and that spirituality, that's always been my base.
Yeah.
I'll say, first of all, even just like hearing him talk about Motown, but how I was telling the story outside, is I moved to New York in '98, and I knew nobody. And my way of getting to know the city was walking around. And I was walking around, I think it was the Lower East Side, I can't remember where, but I saw this poster, and it said this play called Blue. And it had Phylicia Rashad's name. So to me, that was Mrs. Cosby. It's like, all right, I'm seeing this play. And of course, I didn't know at the time who the writer was. Fast forward 10, 12 years later, and I'm having a coffee, and he said to me, "It's like I only have 30 minutes," and of course, it turned into 2 hours that meeting, and it was my quote unquote interview for Motown, as choreographer. And then the name Charles Randolph Wright, I was like, I know that name. Like it stood out for me back then. I was like, that's such a fancy name. And I think the journey of that, and then we've worked together on several things after that. To me, that is spiritual. To me, that is it's not a mistake. It's not an accident. Right. And so, to what Charles was saying, is like how we make work. It's not the way we go about it and who we include in the room and how we. That is important because, a lot of people weren't gonna give me a shot at doing Broadway. And so I think when I look at that journey, to me, there's a spirituality in that. And then the work that comes out of the people that we put in the room, it creates a level of like as Maya Angelou says, you'll never remember what they said. You'll only remember how they made you feel.
Amen.
And so I choose now these days to surround myself with people that make me feel good about the work that I'm doing, and if it doesn't feel that way, then it's just not right. It's not a right fit, So
Exactly.
And that frequency is spiritual, right? Like, and if you view it that way, you will protect it in that way, and then it will also show up in the art. It always does. It always does.
Oh, yeah.
What about you, Zhailon?
There's a lot of things I would say. I guess the thing that I would bring up here is just how much the role of integrity has to play in my own way into my spiritual practice as a director or as a storyteller. By which I mean, I don't think there's any other quantifiable way to know if you're successful outside of if you've done what you said you sought out to do. And so being really, really specific about what I'm setting out to do and knowing that that is my measure of success. And so then those values that I'm trying to hold on to are often rooted in deep, deep spiritual kind of seeking, belief, practice. Something I say over and over, and I'm sure I sound like a broken record. There's podcasts and interviews of me saying this, but it just is what it is that how you make is as important as what you make. And I had been saying that for a few years and doing that at the intersection of art and advocacy, and really having that be my moniker. And then I went back on YouTube, and I was just I had a high school TV show that,
Of course you did.
Sure.
I need to see this. I need to see it now.
I will slide you someday. But one of the videos, I was class president, and a classmate died tragically in a car accident her junior year or senior year. And I knew that part of the responsibility of the class president was to figure out something to give back to the school on behalf of your class. And so we wanted to give a commemorative memorial stone in dedication to this classmate. And long story short, I saw this video of a concert that I produced and directed in high school to raise money for this stone that the class wanted to dedicate to his family. And in that speech, before I had any kind of awareness of what my political ideas or ethos would be in the world, I say in the opening of that speech at 16 that I believe that how we raise this money needs to meet the thing we're raising it for. And that was the first time, and I feel like a lot of times with queer people specifically, we learn so much in hindsight. We learn so much just about living through stuff. And so for me, the way I understand what I am doing is sometimes just going back to Facebook memories or old YouTube videos or journals or whatever. And so to know that actually something greater than me that had more capacity than I did had dropped a value inside of me before I could even really articulate that value just made me know that these values are bigger than me, and I'm here on assignment. It is not something I've manufactured, that it's part of what this little skin sack is on the planet to do. It's a long way of getting to that, but yeah.
That's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Amen, amen, amen. And it leads me to my next question. When you're so centered in your deliberate creation and being intentional about what you do, and you have strong values, and that's at the center of who you are, and then you get into an industry that is, at the end of the day, about making money, what they think will make money, and not really changing the very specific systemic practices. How do you, on a daily basis, hold tight to your values while also knowing that you're going to have to collaborate, encounter, pitch to people who probably value a lot of the same things that you do, but will not prioritize it over the award, over the amount of money, or even over just, ego? How do you do that?
I'll answer first, only just to say that my answer is completely informed by the fact that they still live and thrive and breathe and survive.
Barely.
That they haven't been kicked out, that they are still working.
But I say that to say anything that I would say comprehensively to that question wouldn't be even possible if I thought I was alone. And I do think that they come up in a time where statistically they kind of were. And so I am really curious of how did you, not to add on to your question,
no, but it is. No, this is a conversation.
I'll go right after him because I'm going to save him for last.
The old one.
He's got the most.
Granddaddy.
No, I'll say this, part of your question. I haven't always. I think in the last 2-3 years, I feel like I've gone back to myself as an artist, because I arrived here as an artist, and then I did this big thing on Broadway, and then the expectation of what has to come after that sent me into a bit of a spiral of constantly. I said during the pandemic, once I had my come to Jesus moment, was I felt like I was running towards nothing in the hope of finding something.
Oh, that's a word in itself.
And the day I decided to stop that, I was like, I'm not doing that anymore. I want to, and so it's not easy, but I think, and Charles can go further than this, is the ones that came before us. Paul Robeson. Charles just did Trouble in Mind. On Broadway, and he can talk more about that. But I think it's very important that you do stick to your values. And I think ultimately those that are on the other side of the table, when it's all said and done, maybe not in the moment, it might take a year, it might take several years, they will come back and go that is actually the way it should be done. Because, and Charles, please, because I think Trouble in Mind is actually the proof of concept, the reason why we actually are who we are is because you don't bend. You just don't.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to ask you about this, but I didn't know how open you were to talk about it. But if you are willing and open to talk about your experience in making Trouble in Mind come to life.
I will go back to my family, first of all, because my mother, when I started elementary school, even nursery school just before that, my mother said make an A or an F. She said, there is no average in this family. She said, you make a statement. And so I've had that curse and that blessing my whole career, because they don't want us to make A's. They don't want that to happen. So I've always been very conscious of that. How do I make that A? And their A may not be my A, and my A is the one that's important. And so that's how I kept going. Sidney Poitier said that it never was impossible. It was just more difficult for him. So if they could do that, then I could do it, then he could do it, then you two could do it. And I love you saying that, because there were so few of us. We had to kick down the door, and then you kick down the door, and then there are more doors and more doors, and it was constant. I've seldom, I used to say never, but I guess it's not never now. I did not have equity with my white counterparts. And it was very obvious, and it was constant, but that didn't deter me. It made me more determined, right? But it was, again, when you go back to the spirituality, having the grounding. I've always had a church, and we go to the same church. I've always had a church, and you've had the minister on the show, so once they see Jacqui, they know. I've always had that to keep me going. to just say when you want to give up. I remember when someone said to me, how do you do this? My God, how do you say, do you ever doubt yourself? I said, every damn day. You wake up and you go, can I go into this room? Can I do this? Can I fight this fight again? And then you see work that you all are doing, and it's like, I made a difference. If that helped you, then
really
it's worth
did,
it.
yeah.
Then it's worth it. Because there's so many times where I think, why am I doing this? What's the point?
Yeah.
You know, and then I finally realized I want to be the person that changes the world. But if I'm not that person, I want to affect the person that changes the world. So it's all those paths, all those things, and then you realize, and then you have those moments where you realize it doesn't. Opening night of Trouble in Mind, I just thought, it doesn't get better than this. If I never do another Broadway show.
What did I say to you?
I'm fine.
Opening night?
I don't remember what
I
you
didn't
said
say
to me.
anything.
Oh, you didn't.
Because
I was like, I don't remember
because
what you
couldn't,
said.
Because I couldn't speak. Do you remember?
Yes.
I just looked at it. I was like, I got nothing.
I first read Alice Childress in college, and she was from South Carolina, then moved to New York, and she was in the world of Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte, and they were all friends, and Sidney allegedly was the one who told her to start writing, and which she did, and then Trouble in Mind she obviously wrote. It was a big success off Broadway. They wanted to move it to Broadway. The producers told her that she had to change the content for them to move it. She had to make it work, and she tried. She did some drafts trying to do it, and finally she said, I can't do this. And she did not do that. This is in the 50s. She had the opportunity to be the first black female playwright on Broadway, and she said no, and Raisin in the Sun ended up being that, and they were close friends. Lorraine actually wanted Alice to play Mama.
To play Mom, yeah.
And she literally said, because Alice was very light-skinned, and she said, no, you need something, you need a different Mama. I'll leave it at that. You know,
because she had Sydney as well.
You know, and it's that. She said, you need, I'm not that person, because she was a brilliant actress. And for decades, I was obsessed with bringing her story because it was never on Broadway, and it was in different regional theaters, and I just kept saying, she has to be on Broadway. And it became my obsession for 15 years.
Wow.
And we finally, we had to do it during the pandemic, but it was the idea of finally being able to bring her, and now everyone's doing her work everywhere. And I did have that moment because I now try to force myself to have those moments where I said, I did that.
Yeah, and be proud of it. And
I
consider
did that.
It, right?
I fought and fought,
Yeah.
and we did. Alice is now in the canon, and she was not there.
And if I may add, that prior to that, there had only ever been 2 black lighting designers on Broadway since 1866. And Charles hired Kathy.
Right.
And here's somebody who's had, massive experience, has worked around the country, but it just
Around the world.
and around the world, it just never been on Broadway. And so I think the power of Alice's voice came through in multiple ways, not just,
And all the people, there were so many people making their Broadway debuts, crew in the crew as well as on stage and off stage, and to do that, and circles, it's all those things. Our first day on stage, we didn't realize it. Someone said, oh my God, it's Alice Childress' birthday. And it was our first day on stage, so she was with us.
And that's the spirituality you're
That's
talking
it.
about, because
That's that grounding.
there's Alice. She was there, in spirit, and she smiled because it was the words that she had originally written and intended, and not some version
Right.
of producers wanting her to change her vision. And so you have to stick to what you believe.
And what's so beautiful about all the connective tissue from you encountering Blue and y'all's relationship and me and the story I told you before we got in here, it's just like the rooted, spiritually grounded path is the path of community. And it is the path that leaves you not alone, even if you may be by yourself, that there's a distinction, right? Like, my room is my room, and I don't really know what's going on in other rooms. But because my work is not about an individual pursuit, then his fruit is my fruit, and my fruit is his fruit, because it is this larger, greater conversation. When you were like, I hope something I do impacts the one, yes, it already has, and there's proof, and I'm proof, and also it's continuously a part of, like, there is no, it's not linear,
Right.
you know, on the spiritual plane. It's like, this conversation is art. This is, you know, anyway.
And I
it's
used to
all
think
beautiful.
it was linear, and I gave up because it just didn't make any sense. And so once you stop trying to make it linear, once you're like, in my country, South Africa, it's called Ubuntu. It means I am because you are. Meaning that the actions of what he did affected me, has affected you, has affected you. Like, it is just, it starts with that and it just spreads. And so the moment that you now step outside of that and go, okay, let me go, you're now disconnected to that. So like Zhailon was saying, is like, you may feel, you know, alone, but you're not by yourself. And I think that's the beautiful thing about what we have.
And we were taught to be alone, because to be separated, because that empowers. I didn't have this team like this. You know,
I remember you said that to me.
You
It
were
was
often
like,
so we were alone. You're like the one black person on a project, the one person in the room. There's no one else. That I've only been hired by someone that looks like me in my 4 decades in this business 3 times.
Wow.
And so, and they're big names I can drop, but it's 3 times, right? And seeing that you aren't going through this, you're going through what you're going through, but you're in spaces where you see each other, you know, and because, and you help each other. And we weren't taught that. Everything was place someone in a box, because the minute you place someone in a box, they know how to ignore you. So how you break out of that, how do you change that? And I love the idea too. I love that we can sit here and say that, and then I can also breathe and say, good, y'all go do it, I'm done. You know, it's like, and that we help each other do that.
I don't know if you remember in London, we were staging Motown in the West End, and it was like the first week, and we'd say things, and all of them were like a little bit of deer in headlights. And so finally we were like, you know, talk to us. And finally Tanya said to me, she's like, Warren, she goes, you must understand something. We've never had everybody who tells us what to do look like us. We were a black director, black choreographer, black musical director. And so they were in shock. They were like, we don't know how to, it's the first time. And that was 2015.
Right.
And I've had that happen to me in my young career that I'm living right now. Already I've had people be like, I know you're asking of this, but we need a beat because we've never experienced this room. And I think the only thing that's different in my generation that I tell people is that now those rooms are plural. So the onus is on you to actually care enough to go find them. I mean, there was a time where, very, very hard to find, almost a lotto. But if you're in it now, it's up to you to go find those rooms because they're plural.
Yes.
And so if you do look for them, they will appear.
Right.
But you have to actually put your neck out there and say, this is the kind of artist I am, and this is the kind of
It's still a challenge.
room I want to be in. Yeah.
It's no less of a challenge.
Right.
There may be more opportunities, but you're not going to be given things.
No.
And that's it won't be given to you. And so what you all have done is fight for it. And that's what I hope that fight, that the fight that's in both of you especially, that continues. That we somehow instill that, because it inspires me to keep doing it when I don't want to do it. And that's very exciting. Very exciting and fulfilling. It's like it wasn't in vain. You know, it wasn't in vain.
And in the moment, it might have felt like, like it was just, I'm
Wow.
done.
Well, and
then-
it's what you beautifully highlighted is that outside of the blackness of it all, being a director is an extremely isolating job. And I had to realize that this past year because I really made my true transition into being a leading director choreographer. And just little things like, y'all are gonna laugh at this, but like there was a moment where the actors had a group chat and they were talking. And I remember thinking like, why am I not in the group chat? Because I have spent so many years being an actor in the group chat, you know? And then I felt disconnected from them. And then I was like,
outside of this.
but I'm supposed to be. I'm not supposed to be in the group chat. And that's okay. But you need to go find community like the community that I've built with you.
Right.
And that is not going to be the same as it was when you were an actor. Which I want to talk about next is that like we all have partners, and being in this role, specifically if you're working in theater and also in TV and film, because there's a lot of flying and traveling. How do you manage your relationships, not just romantic, but just relationships with other people, and not feel like you're missing out on, you know...
Warren has 2 kids.
You want to ask my wife that question?
Yeah, exactly. Because our
Warren has
partners,
2 children.
See, and our partners and our families will have a different answer to this
Yeah.
question because, you know, they're impacted differently. But I want to also talk about that isolation of it. How's that?
I keep referencing this just because we've worked together now for so many. So I had my son, and about 6 weeks later, we were doing Born for This in California. And again, and this is where like brotherhood and community and all of this is so important. And I remember like I called Charles and I was like, I'm doing it. How much can I miss? Because like my son is 6 weeks old. So I showed up like 3 days later, like that's, you remember that? And then I did, you don't remember, you were just like, yes, you're fine. But I stayed for like the most part, and then he allowed me to come back so I could be with my family. And then I went back for like the opening. But also, you know, Brian Holland Brooks was, you know, my associate, and Brian is a choreographer in his own. And so having that community is what I lean on. Like I leaned on Charles, I leaned on Brian. Like it's what helps me. And the difficult part of it is that it's not consistent. I do now work less away because of it. But I think it's choosing a partner who really understands what the DNA of what it is they're getting into. And I know he can attest to that as well. For me, it's just knowing that it's not something that, you know, they are marrying or they are partnering with the artist that is also the person that they're in love with, and along with that comes a lot of travel, unfortunately.
How do you shut down? That's the thing that I had to learn, is that this is not 24/7. They want you to be 24/7. And there were times when I would turn off my phone, and it's this certain person has to call you, and someone major has to call you, and it can wait. It can wait. This is not, especially with what we've been through in these past few years. I mean, that's life and death. This is not life and death. We are in an industry where we get to entertain, and we get to hopefully enlighten and elevate and all of this. But you have to take care of yourself. And so I know when to do that, when to escape, when to not allow people in.
Don't call him in August, he's gone.
It's just, to do that.
And how do you get to a place where you can truly live in that boundary? Because placing a boundary like that, in a world where, like, specifically in our business, where there's so much scarcity mentality, that, oh, then if I don't do this, then Warren's doing it, or Jalen's doing it, or Matthew's doing it, right? How do you set yourself so clearly in your intention to make space for yourself? Because a lot of people watching this, whether they're in this career field or in any career field, really struggle with that. Like, how did you get to that place?
I mean, it takes time. You know, when you're younger, you think you have to do every single thing. Now I don't feel that way. So you will, what's that whole thing when they did the whole, it gets better? It gets different. How's that?
It'll get better, bitch. It gets different.
Y'all say that. I'll say it gets different.
Yeah.
So you learn how you deal with that. You learn where you place it. I'll never forget a friend of mine, one of my first jobs was this huge, I got to do this anniversary, and it was this big thing at the UN, and the producer said to me, stand back and look at this. Just half of you just look at what you did, and I hope you did that on your your first Broadway. Like, to just stand back and look at that without putting anything on it I should have done, whatever. Look what I did. And I have that memory of everything I've ever done.
Beautiful.
Where I could just stand back and say, this is what I did, this is what I did wrong, this is what I did, whatever. But to say, I did, anyone who gets a show up should be applauded.
Yeah.
I mean, it is so impossible to do, but it's not. You do that work. So but you must have boundaries. You must have barriers, and you can't think always, oh, I have to do all these things or else I won't get it. You do all these things, you may not get it. If you don't take care of you won't do that. If you aren't your best you, then you won't be able to do that work.
That's
and
true.
that's a difficult place. But each thing you'll discover more, but you have to take time. And I think your generations are better about that.
Oh, yeah.
Because we were like, we
didn't know terms like, mental health and like
Yeah.
safe, like we didn't,
Please.
it was just go, go, go. But like I said, the last few years, I've had to like rethink everything. I'd be like, no, it's like 8 o'clock, I'm home, I have bedtime. Or like, it's important for me to shut down the phone. It's important for me to be present. And I wasn't like that. It wasn't, my wife will tell you that.
So with my partner.
I don't know if I've completely, I still feel very inside of that question. And I'm much better than I was, but I hope it doesn't end where I am now. You know what I mean? Like, there's still so much that I need to learn in terms of being okay saying no, taking that boundary, turning the phone off and not vibrate. Because when it's on vibrate, half of my brain is already guessing, okay, that's that
What is
email,
that?
that's that text message. And I would say that the only thing that has kind of helped is a couple of understandings. One, to your point of just like, the more I take care of myself, the more I actually can serve the communities that I work with. That I actually can't do the thing I'm promising is going to happen in every room if I don't eat, if I don't go home, if I don't make a date night, if I don't, I actually can't do my job. And there's nothing that haunts me more than failing at my job. And so that kind of artificial dopamine release of just telling yourself, don't be a failure, take care of yourself, has been helpful at this stage. And I would say too, channeling my advocacy towards myself and understanding that what I advocate for on paper for myself is for the world.
Amen.
And that has been probably the hardest thing. And now I feel like I'm in a space where it's become much, much easier, but it does mean that every single relationship I get into professionally has to be a relationship where I'm not just inspired by them artistically, but I'm inspired by them civically.
Yes.
And then that is as much a part of the thing that we're making as possible. When I have collaborators that go, let's use half of the budget for childcare. My first response is actually not, yes, that's a good idea, but actually, no, let's go to the producers and make them find you childcare. And so what does it mean to take that kind of advocacy and point it towards yourself? Because this system financially is not set up for the kind of self-care that I might need on a Wednesday at 2 o'clock when I don't want to go do it. And so advocating to producers, actually, I don't need 3 reimbursements. I need for you to pay me bi-weekly like a normal human, because I need to know what I'm going to make a grocery list of, and I need to know when I'm going to buy this thing, and like all of these super ordinary things that a lot of the people we went to school with, just find as normal are these extraordinary things you have to advocate for in this industry. My partner's not in this industry, so when he sees me on the phone with agents or trying to work something out, he's like, so that you're paid on time. That's what all of that is for, and so just trying to make it bigger than myself, even though it is about me, is like my easiest way into it at this stage as a 29-year-old who is still very much, learning.
And also just it's I also just learned to not be a people pleaser. Like I finally learned how to just be like, no. I just did a show and on 43rd Street, and it was like, rehearsal started at 10. Now I drop my daughter off at 9:15 every day. I take my kids to school, and by the time I drop the car and then get on the subway it's going to be like 10:15, and I knew I could push it and make it through, but then I knew how I was going to feel. So I was like, I can't be there at 10 o'clock. I can be there at 10:30. Like, so only call my call time at 10:30. Like, if there's music or anything else that has to be worked on between 10, that's great, but I will not be in the building until 10:30. Everyone was like, great, now we know. And so now I walked into the building, I had my coffee, I felt, at 10:15, I'm early, but it's something I had to learn. So it's like that thing of what he was saying is boundaries is like really, to Zhailon's point, is like, if you're making sure that you are taken care of, actually then everyone else is also benefiting from that, rather than you trying to fit into this thing of like, well, let me get up to 42nd Street and now everyone's mad because I'm late.
Right.
I
remember years ago, and I was working on I don't remember the show, and I was working on a show, and my friend's husband died completely unexpectedly. They had 3 children. I mean, it was the last thing. And she's a lawyer, this rock. I'd never seen her cry. She's immovable. Nothing shifts her. She's that person. And her husband died, and I was doing this. I was in rehearsal, and she was like, I understand you can't come. You're doing a show. That's it. You can't come down for that. And I was like, I wish I could come. I can't be there. I have rehearsal. And then I went, wait a minute. I'm the director. This is my friend. She typed my papers in college, right? I rooked her into all this. I'm going to be there for her. So I was like, I can't be there that day. You have to figure that out. You have to do whatever that is. And I took the train because she lives outside of DC. And I'll never forget when I walked in to this room and she saw me, she collapsed. And her kids talked about how she hadn't let go. And I walked in, and the fact that, and so I hold that with me, that I can do that.
And don't you think a sense like that in a person, of course that person can find a moment on stage that works. So why not work with that person and make their lives easier if they're bringing that kind of integral rigor to their actual life? I'm going to bring it to a fake life too. You know what I mean? And so that's just inspiring, because it's like, so often, I think you said it earlier, this industry will make you feel as if you're the only one on that struggle bus, ball change. But you're not. And I think the more these conversations happen and the more we center these behaviors as not one-off incidences of things that I personally did as an individual to just make my life easier, but see their connection to the whole thing, the more we can look at them as objective practices.
Well, like you were saying earlier, you said, what we do is equal, how we do things is equally as important as what we do. And like that's an example of it. It's like, actually, I need to be with my friend right now. And this can take a pause, or I can put people in place that's going to make sure the ship keeps running, but I need to go there. And whoever is around you during that time, seeing you do that, they go, oh, that's somebody with integrity, or somebody that holds, and maybe not everyone, maybe not the big producer or whatever.
I can't even remember what the show was. That's the thing.
Wow. It wasn't with us, right?
No,
because
no,
I know you lost somebody.
I did, but that was long before that, and I don't remember.
Wow.
I remember
but
that.
You remember how
well, it was the same thing that happened in London.
But you know what's so beautiful about that? It takes it back to the Maya Angelou quote, right?
It is the Maya Angelou.
Because you don't remember the show. At the end of life, we're not going to remember all these shows.
No.
We're not going to remember all these things that we're chasing. We're going to remember that friend that collapsed in our arms. Isn't that powerful?
Yeah.
When we were doing London, Motown, my best friend died.
Yes.
In a tragic motorcycle accident. And I had to go to his, was it Sadler's Wells? It was a big memorial. And I had Charles on this side and Brian on this side. And the whole time they held my hands, because I was like,
that was rough.
I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. And I had my Motown family there, and it was, thank God, because I wouldn't have made it. I knew I wouldn't have. And I think that's, again, we had to leave rehearsal early. We had a bunch of TV stuff we had to do. We just paused it.
Nope. And know that we have been through some of this, and everything that you do will be its own way, but all of us have experienced different things. Us being able to help each other from this moment, the 4 of us have the hood, the brotherhood, that we, that it's like call and help. And we all need that cry for help. And because I tried to do it all by myself so often, you know, and it was so insular and just thinking, I have to do this, I have to make this happen, I have to, and when I needed just to talk to someone and didn't have that, especially in these worlds where it's just us, where we all have been, which is ridiculous that you at 29,
I know,
that
stop
you're
it.
still dealing with that, that you're still having that, you know, you thought, ugh, that's madness.
I'm just mad he's 29.
I know, I can't even.
This panel is
I
so
can't.
purposeful that we have people from multiple generations. Like Zhailon is in his 20s, I'm in my 30s, Warren's in his 40s, and Charles
is
is
in
in
his
his
60s. He's saying 50s. That's so nice. So I was 10 when I was in Dreamgirls then. How's that?
Oh my
It
God.
is eternal.
But like when I say that and talk about all the different generations that are represented here, we all share something in common though, that after 2020, this industry really decided
Yes.
to shift its lens to look at people like us and in its own way, think about opening its doors to us in ways that it wasn't opening its doors before. And we live in this era now of the first black this, the first black that, the youngest black this, right? Like
That's
all
right.
of us, right? Like all of us have kind of
I
been in
hated
this.
seeing that too.
I know, seeing it was
I
like
mean, I
now.
loved it.
Wait a minute, can we talk about what we're
yeah, yeah.
referencing?
Yeah.
Jalen
Yeah.
is the youngest black director
director
in
on
history
Broadway
on
ever.
Broadway,
Right.
yes.
And one of the youngest directors though
Yeah,
too,
director.
right?
So to me, the more impressive statistic is like the second youngest ever.
Ever. That's what I, you
The
know.
first was Orson Welles in
Okay.
1939.
You
So
and
it's like
Orson.
not bad company to be in. But
Yeah.
no, and also like how to hold that and all that. It's a whole different conversation. But yes.
Yeah, but like, so let's talk about our careers and our lives before 2020 and then the shift that happened after that. And I know that this is like the place where a lot of us, you need to drink some water. A lot of us have our own like individual experiences, but I think there's a common frequency that we have all felt. That I know that I've had individual conversations with each one of you about being in this place of being completely gracious and happy that we're creating art, but also being centered in the realness that a lot of this has come at the heels of years of not being seen, of years of knocking on doors, and also what some people would say is a false sense of actually offering us a seat at the table. It's not really rooted in a true value. It's more so performative. How have you been able to navigate your career after coming back from the pandemic and the world, specifically the entertainment world, waking up to the idea that they have not had their doors open to us as creatives? That's a big one, I know.
I mean,
Saved it for the end on purpose.
Okay.
I mean, I will say it doesn't make any of these questions that we're talking about easier to answer. It just makes them more complicated. To his, it doesn't get better, it gets different. I mean, the biggest aha for me was like, oh, I just see different kinds of injustices now. It's an
Yes,
interesting privilege to be here and
Yeah.
see it from this vantage
Right.
point. And so if anything, it is always just reflecting back to yourself. So what are you gonna do? So what are you gonna do? So what are you gonna do? Are you okay with that? Are you cool with that? Are you cool with that? So just more questions and more conversations. And I think I have found that the people who are the most let down by this moment are the people who maybe projected too much onto it. Because I don't think it's made anything less complicated.
no.
So we may be getting some of the results that we want, but we're also getting a complicated mix of things to negotiate with them. And that, I think, is going to really filter out who is in this space intentionally. You know, as we all know, we've worked in different stages. Broadway doesn't have to mean the pinnacle of anything, other than people can make a living for a while. And so if your standard for success on Broadway is purely based on merit, is purely based on artistic achievement, or is purely based on what the white establishment approves or disapproves, then it's not going to be any easier for you to be in anybody's room. For me, one of the reasons we said yes to going to do Chicken and Biscuits on Broadway as opposed to off Broadway, or not doing it after the pandemic, because we had a production up in Queens that closed after a few weeks because of COVID, was because of the opportunity to create precedent that hadn't existed before. That's a distinctive thing that does happen on Broadway. That there is a ripple if you give 33 people Broadway debuts, which we had both on and off stage. I was definitely not the only person making history on that production. And since then, every one of our designers has worked on Broadway again, or worked in a really commercial capacity. So many of our actors have gone on to do other things.
Douglas has had 3,000 productions.
Has had 3,000 productions. And the amount of people that have been able to do the play keeps growing, right? And so, that's a strong enough why to put up with all the complications that come with being an artist emerging in this moment. But your why can't just be trying to be cute, because the rug will be pulled.
And you have to be ready. See, the thing that is difficult with all the DEI and EDI and all the things were people who were not ready, and then the opportunities go away. And I always say they have an opportunity to fail up. We have no chance at that.
I say that all the time.
That's the difference.
And the second part that I want to tag on to this is that also a lot of these Black people were then brought into artistic director positions at these regional theaters.
Right.
In an industry that was literally failing. So you come in at a deficit trying to save something that is already really struggling, and you're the Black person now that is supposed to completely erase all of the systemic issues that these companies had with race. But on top of that, you're supposed to help us get people to come back to the theater after COVID, where we've been told for now almost 2 years that we shouldn't be near anybody, right? And then so not only are you not fully cooked to do the job, you're also kind of thrown in this environment to where you're asking to do so much with less resources.
And the pandemic.
Yes, right? And so what is happening in this DEI conversation that makes me get kind of hot is that I have so many friends that are great artistic minds, that are brilliant, but got into a position or a role that they simply needed just a little bit more time to either be an associate or just were a little bit undercooked, that weren't ready to fully take in the full magnitude of what they were being given, that could have easily succeeded if they had more time to grow into their roles, but now won't probably work again because they got this opportunity and then they quote unquote failed. Right?
That's why we created BTC.
Yeah, exactly. That's why
BTC
was created. I was hoping that you would tee it up.
But thank you. But it's the idea that, that any artist, let's remove race for a second. Any artist can walk into a room, experiment. I hate the word failure, but fail at something and then and pivot and we know we've never had that. So here, come out of 2020, out of 2020, 2021, these artists now had to carry the weight of everything that you just mentioned, and also have to make this art, this thing they've been working on for a long, long time. And so to me, it was just, part of why the team started BTC is how can we have people like yourself? How can we have Amina Alexander? How can we have Jordan? How can we have all these people in positions where on a day-to-day basis, they are figuring it out, they are navigating. Our mission is to remove the illusion of inclusion in the American theater by creating an ethical and sustainable model for Black professionals to be able to have employment in the theater. The idea that when Broadway closed on March 12th, 2020, there was 0 Black general managers on Broadway. There's 11 working now. Right, so you know what the trickle-down effect is of the general manager. The general manager now decides who the vendors are, what he's doing with the designers, and so all of a sudden this hiring's happening. But he was doing it at the same time at Chicken and Biscuits, and then he was doing this, for his career. But really on Motown, hiring someone like myself, hiring someone like Joseph Joubert, hiring folks that they normally see talented, but they were never given a shot. And so the network, and even out there, we were networking already. I was I know I'm going to get, to call you because you're from Louisiana. That is important. And what BTC does is it goes, we have the mixer on Friday. I hope you're coming. But it's who's working on what? And now that connection happens. And I went to a reading a week ago where the producer was a former BTC fellow and is now working in a major as a creative director, and the general manager is a former BTC fellow and is now working at a major firm, and they produced and general managed the whole reading. And the room was filled with bigwigs. And it was just like every other major reading I've ever gone to. It's like, oh, Gerald Roth is here, so-and-so's here, that's great. Oh, and it happened to be done by these folks.
Yes.
And that's the dream, because none of us here want a handout. None of us. Like, we didn't come up in our careers with the idea of wanting a handout. It's all about opportunity. And so I think removing the illusion of inclusion, I always say my favorite story, I think you told me this, was Betty White. Right, Betty White had Arthur Duncan on her show in 1956, and the producers, you know, Arthur Duncan was this amazing tap dancer, and the producers said, "Oh, you can't have him on your show will be canceled." And Betty White was like, "But he's an amazing artist," and so she didn't listen. She had him on the show dancing, and then she put him on the couch, as she did with all of them, and then she lost her show, and Betty White was okay with that. So I'm like, if Betty White knew in 1955, 1956 that what this is wrong, don't tell me today like, oh, I didn't know. Because you do know. But it's all about how you're going to now navigate your way out of that. How are we going to move forward, right? For me, it's not about burning down. For me, it's about taking responsibility, but now how can we build this? And don't come up with Band-Aid solutions. Don't be like, here's $100,000, we're done, that's great, that was wonderful. What is the actual model that's going to make it sustainable and ethical? And the ethical part is important, because we want to make sure that people are treated how you would treat everybody else. And by everybody else, we know what we mean, right?
Right.
Yeah. And what is beautiful to me is that all of you in your own ways have already done this, reaching out and pulling people in. Zhailon, that you were able to have all of those debuts. Warren with your work with BTC, and then you saying, no, my choreographer is going to be black, my lighting designer is going to be black on this, like
For years.
Yeah, but like always doing this work, because what happens is, and I want to look at the camera when I say this, is that a lot of black creators that have been given this opportunity, the impulse is like, well, I need this 5-time Tony Award winner in order to validate my existence. And because those resources usually were given to white people, you see this one black voice moving forward, but everyone on the team does not really represent any other type of marginalized group. And I could see why you would have that pressure. But I want to challenge people, and not just black people, but also white people, that like, when I say equity is going to cost you something, it's going to also cost you your time, because building a creative team is a very vulnerable relationship. And what is happening, and also, and y'all have been clocking it probably like I've been clocking it, when we have these white directors or white producers just pairing like random black people with white people on these shows to like diversify something, or they put a woman with this man, blah, 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 and these people don't have like any type of connection, you know, what can end up happening is, because there's no foundation or trust there, they will then blame it on the fact that they tried to do this equity thing. But no, like, you have to invest time. Like the same reason why you were able, the reason why you were able to do such beautiful work with that white lighting designer that you had is because y'all did 5 shows together and built a trust and a relationship with each other. So you got to take that same time to meet and hang out with black directors, lighting designers. You got to meet these people. It's going to cost you time and resources, and I don't think people get that. They're going for the quick fix. No, you know, I'll just hire these black people, that person, that person. Not every black person is right for that job.
Yeah.
And there you are.
You know what I
And I
mean?
would say there's two other kinds of diversities that I think are really important, not just two, but things that even, I don't want it to feel like just because I'm a black director, I never have to deal with the complication of how do I build my team.
Yeah.
It's never just like, it's black. Because sometimes it's black can mean that it's too male heavy.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes it's black can also mean that like you're doing a play in a community that needs to have half of the team come from that community.
Yes.
Yes.
Sometimes, you know, it also means, it's also about gender equality. It's also about, do I have
Yes.
any kind of queer voices on my team? And in what kind of story world makes it inclusive for those bodies to have a free imagination.
Beautiful.
Right? And so
a
that
diverse
becomes,
team.
that it's also an artistic question.
Yeah.
Not just a question of representation, but how can I set up this specific type of person's imagination? I want your black imagination. I want your queer imagination. I want your female imagination.
Yes.
And if I'm just interested in you as a identity to check a box, I don't get your secrets. And that's what I'm invested in. And I want as many secrets from as many different people as possible. And I just know that a team of Black people come with an arsenal of imagination that doesn't need as much priming, but it doesn't mean that there aren't areas to be looking for, you know, even deeper kind of diversity.
And also the flip side of this, because we have to put a button on this conversation in general, but I want to also say the flip side of saying that all these Black shows deserve all Black teams is that you're telling producer and general managers only to call me when you have a Black show.
Well, I think
There's a flip side of that, though, right? Because you're also in subconscious, like, you know what, I'm only gonna call Matthew when I have a Black show, but I can tell all types of stories, and I feel like we need to get to the place to where we're looking at the lived experience on the stage, looking at the community that we're speaking in, and building the most diverse team that can help us not only amplify the lived experience of those people, but also the general audience. And I love that you said that, because it's not just Black and white, it's gender, it's age, it's everything.
It's age, there's such a lack
Yeah.
of age diversity.
Oh
in this
my gosh,
industry.
yeah, so much.
The
So much
ageism,
more.
well, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, luckily because of my genes,
I know.
They don't completely, right? You know, I mean, I was blessed with this, but one quick thing is I keep thinking we met at church, because we go to the same church, and our church was picked by CBS to do the Christmas Eve special. And CBS Christmas Eve special, I said, the first thing I said, because they asked me to direct it, and I said, have they been to our church? You know, a drag queen will be coming down the aisle handing out programs. I thought, what's going to happen, right? And so we did this. Jacqui got up. The first line in her sermon was, "Who's that little white baby on the Christmas card?" Because that's not Jesus. I thought,
Look at a castle.
okay. And then so all of the things in this, like, and the choir looks like I planned it. Like there was a shot, and I was looking at this, and the guy switching said to me, "Oh my God, it's like it looked like central casting." Old white woman, gray hair, Asian woman, Black guy, it was this, and then this one who did this incredible performance in this number that we did. And so when it was 11:35 on Christmas Eve, and they hadn't announced coming up so-and-so, they hadn't said it, and I thought, they're not going to put us on.
Wow.
They saw it, they're not going to put us on. And then the show came on, and what that did for people, because they had never seen anything like this. They had never seen a church like this and people like this. And you have to see this number that he was in, where he did something visually that I will never, ever forget. And it was just one of those moments where people just, your instinct of what that was, of the storytelling, of where we are, and it's something that we gave everyone, whether they accepted it or not. And that's what you have to do.
I think just listening to all of you talk about this, what we're really seeking is culture. The representation of our culture.
Yeah.
None of us are interested in having all Black rooms. We're interested
Yeah.
in understanding that the culture, and when I say Black, I mean as a culture.
Yes.
Like making sure that those cultures are present, because what we're trying to make or create or bloom, grow is we know that the storytelling is going to benefit from it, that it's going to be. And so like having just one Black person in a room is not beneficial, because now that Black person is trying to figure out, how do I hold and bring myself to without trying to rock the boat
represent
or offend
everybody,
and represent
you know?
everybody.
You
Whereas
can't do that.
no, whereas really what we are seeking for is equity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ubuntu, right? We're
Ubuntu.
all
Ubuntu.
together. You know what, y'all? This has been an absolute dream. Like, I imagine that someone is going to watch this, and no matter what their lived experience is, if they choose to be a creative, say, I just saw 4 dynamic, beautiful spirits express not only their care for the art that they make, but the humanity of people involved and humanity as a whole. And that's the reason why I look to all 3 of you to inspire me. Some of you are more recent in my life than others, but I've always felt that we vibrated on the same frequency. And I'm just so thankful that you would make time to do this, that you opened up so beautifully and earnestly. And I just hope that we can continue to move into a place to where not only people feel more seen and valued, but me and Zhailon can continue to march forward with all the amazing work that you've laid for us. and the resources that you've provided us. I'm also a member of BTC. I was a part of the apprenticeship program, and it was my Broadway debut in Hangman as a director. And BTC was fundamental in helping me being seen as more than just a Black choreographer that could choreograph Black things. It like changed the way people saw me and perceived me, and that's why I'm on the track that I am now, because of people like you, Charles. You know, we've had many conversations.
And you inspire us, and you inspire us too. Like like I've been, you know, dying to get to know you. So we've been like making sure that happened over the last year. But you do. Like when I saw your work, I was like,
Who is this?
yes, somebody
is
who's,
this?
you know, young and new and fresh, and it's like, this is what we need. So
I appreciate it.
Thank you for making that happen, and you always do that. You know, how you bring things together, what that is. That's directing.
It is.
You know, and being a part of that is so important. And it inspires us to keep going, because, you know, I'm like, okay, great.
You ready to always quit. You're like, I don't need to do this anymore. I'm too old. I'm done.
But it's that. But then
He quits
doing
all the
this,
time.
I quit all the time. But it's then you go, I can't.
yeah.
I can't. You know, and if for us to do this, that's why we do it. We have, you know, when you said the pandemic, out of the last pandemic, 1918, came the Harlem Renaissance. You know, what is our Renaissance? That's what
Right
we have.
now.
Yep.
We have it now.
That's
We have
it.
the
Yep.
opportunity.
Right.
Because taking us back to our opening mantra, we have the power right now to change direction. You have the power, no matter where you are right now, to change direction. Art has the power to heal. Art has the power to bring people together. And art has the power to transcend language. For all of those reasons, making art is a spiritual practice, so go make art everywhere. I'm Matthew Johnson Harris, and this was another episode of Art and Soul. I hope that you be blessed and have a great day. Peace. Help our community grow by subscribing to our YouTube channel, sharing and liking this episode, and following the Art and Soul podcast on Instagram.